Hey, friends, thank you so much for joining us. Happy Friday. We are in Minnesota and it was 80 degrees on Tuesday, and this morning it was snowing. So, Nathaniel and I are all bundled up today trying to keep warm. The snow didn't stick around, but man, it's cold all of a sudden.
At least it's December out there.
It does. Hey, we are Nathaniel and Amy White with the Homemade Family. If you didn't catch our podcast last week, you're going to want to go back and grab that because we had a very special guest, Rosalind C., on with us. She is a mom of 11 and homeschooled all of them from kindergarten through graduation. She's now grandma to 14?
Anyway, I was 14.
She has lots of fun wisdom, just somebody who's been there, done that, and is a little further along the journey than us. It was great to get some of her insights and perspectives. So you can catch that at www.thehomemadefamily.com or on YouTube, search The Homemade Family, Nathaniel and Amy White, or if you search The Homemade Family on Spotify, you should also find us there or on anywhere podcasts are found. With that, today we are going to jump in talking about love, right? Or hindrances to love. There we go. We got our little hearts here. So Nathaniel, why don't you get us started?
All right. So this is probably going to be an obvious statement, but loving well is literally the only thing that all of us need in order to have strong, thriving, healthy families. In fact, it's actually it's God who says that loving well is literally the only thing even he asks of us. And so that means that if all of us in the world just loved well all the time, then everyone would have a strong, healthy family. And we would have strong, healthy communities and cities that we live in. And the businesses would be strong and healthy because of that, and international relationships between nations would be strong and healthy, and just basically, to sum it up, everything in the world would be better and different.
Seems so easy.
I know, right? Seems so easy, right? Just love well. So all of this is true, but it's also a little tongue-in-cheek because, of course, we know that that's not the case, and even though it sounds so simple, it's obviously not that simple to actually do it. And so that's why we want to talk about removing hindrances to love, because love really does have that transformational power, and we want to help unleash that transformational power into your life, into your family, your home, and your generations. So we have a number of points. I really don't think we're going to get all the way through it again today. This is kind of like our usual. And even as Amy and I were talking this week, like, hey, I think we want to talk about this. It was like, man, every step we take on this, it like opens this massive well to talk about. So just kind of get your seatbelt on, dig in, get a cup of tea, and sit down with us, sit down with your spouse, and maybe even your kids. And this is going to be a good one to just stir up some conversation and some good quiet process time if you can find some of that for yourself. So, all right. That said, I'm going to start with just kind of tip number one. Okay. Tip number one, set love as your priority. One of the biggest hindrances to love is simply not making it an intentional priority. Like, if we just assume that it's a given in our relationship, like, well, I love you, so we got married and we love each other, right? Or like, well, hey, you're my kid, so I love you. And, we can have love for someone and we can love them, but that doesn't automatically mean that love is actually a priority in our thought process or our decision making or in the actions that we take.
Yeah, I just want to share a quick story. So we have homeschooled our children for several years now, and this year we sent 3 of our youngest kids to school, and we're homeschooling the 2 older ones. But when they're high school age, they pretty much do everything all by themselves. And so what we found is that I'm sending the younger kids to school. I'm working all day. The older kids are doing their school all day. And then in the evening, when the older kids are ready to have connection time because they're done with school, I'm then getting the younger kids, being fully hands-on with them and making dinner. And then we get into bedtime routines and the day is over. And so I'm realizing, like, wow, I go morning till evening without truly connecting with my two older kids because we've all of a sudden had a change in our schedule. And so now I'm realizing that, and we're having to intentionally work to restructure some things in our home so that we can have some intentional time. Otherwise, I mean, we're 2 months into school already, or a month and a half, and all of a sudden I'm realizing, like, wait, I feel like I never ever see you anymore. Why is that? And then we had to dial back, figure out why that was, so now we can make some intentional choices to restructure for that connection.
Right. And so, this isn't the kind of thing that completely changes everything that you do in your home. It's like, oh, well, I need to make meals for my family, but what if I just think, how do I add love to what I'm doing? Or how do I make a meal in a loving way? It might just simply be a little twist on a meal that makes it more what certain person in your family really loves this, or you add this as a side dish because it's a favorite, or those kinds of things. Or you've got to put your kids to bed anyway. What if you just, how do I love my kids well in how I put them to bed? It really is like, hey, you've got these things you need to do. I come downstairs every day. How do I come downstairs and love well? Well, I happen to glance over into the living room and see who's there, and I take 30 seconds out of my way and I go give everybody a hug before I move on with making breakfast. It's little things, but it makes a massive difference in connection, in the expression of love. It can be little things like, Amy and I have learned to make a point of raising our eyebrows as we talk, because it tends to lift both a brightness into our eyes and it puts a smile on our face as we're talking to our kids. And so Amy especially has worked on this because she has kind of one of those natural, like,
thinking face.
Her thinking face and her sleepy face and her angry face all kind of look the same. So she's had to work intentionally to just make sure that she's not giving us an intense look all the time. So anyway, all of those things are just examples. You don't need to do those things specifically. I'm just trying to give specific examples so that it's a little bit more practical of just what it looks like to set love as a priority. So first of all, set love as your priority. And I just one quick little thing so that that's not a little burden or a big burden is, it's not like we're adding one more thing to your to-do list. It actually, we're replacing your to-do list entirely. Like, there's one thing on your to-do list, it's to love well. That's it. And that's the beauty of this, is it gets to replace literally everything else. And that this is your entire goal in parenting, is what does it look like to love well? That's all I'm trying to do, because God said that's going to be enough.
Yeah. So one of the hindrances to love is that we allow other things to become our priority instead of love being our priority. And it's so good. Nathaniel's so good at this. I took my daughter clothes shopping the other day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we've been to 15 stores and tried on 3,000 pairs of pants. And, and for me, the goal of the trip was, we need to find pants for my daughter because it's winter and we don't have any. And, as I'm texting my husband, he's like, okay, but what are you doing to connect with her heart today? And I'm like, okay. So it's just even approaching a task with a different bottom line. Okay. So one of
you
the
have a whole day one-on-one with our daughter. What do you want her to take home with her besides clothes?
Right? Yeah. So one of the hindrances is, what is your priority in life? And the answer is, love is the priority.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So that's point one. Mm-hmm. Point two, learn to love yourself well. We're going to be stuck on this one for a little while.
Yes, because one of the hindrances to love truly is not loving yourself well. And we're going to get deep into probably this one. I realized that I was seeing in my daughter especially this level of perfectionism and like self-criticism. And she was working on a project, and I was like, hey, how's that going? And I thought it was phenomenal what she was doing, but she said, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And she was cutting herself down. And it was in that moment that I was like, man, I don't like what I'm hearing from her. And I started to realize, though, but that was the attitude I carry about myself a lot. And she was saying it's not good enough. And I said, and I had to ask her, I said, when do you think it will be good enough? Right? Because sometimes we need to, like, it's this unattainable, unwritten, we don't actually even know what the goal is. We're just dissatisfied, and it comes from that not loving yourself. And so I had to begin to change my own attitude towards myself, because I wanted to see something different reflected in my child.
That's so good.
With that story, why don't you jump back into that?
Yeah, so this is probably the major hindrance to loving well. And that's why we're really going to probably spend the majority of our time, and probably the rest of our time today, on this one. And then going next week, probably, this is my guess, into how do you teach your kids then how to love themselves well and how to love others well. But it really does start with us learning to love ourselves well. And that's the major removing hindrance to love that we can do. Because if we don't love ourselves well, if we don't love ourselves generally at all, that is going to tend to become how we treat other people as well. So like, for example, if we are prone to having a lot of negative self-talk in our minds, or beating ourselves up, or this isn't good enough, or whatever, those kinds of things, at some point that those words are going to be aimed at somebody else as well. And it just, I mean, it actually creates an atmosphere of that other people can feel. And so it just in general, if we don't love ourselves well, that tends to become the culture that we then establish in our home. But the converse of that is also true, that if we love ourselves well, then we will create a culture of being loved, of loving ourselves well, of our kids loving themselves well. And so how do you learn to love yourself well? We have a number of tools. And so just, again, grab your cup of tea, enjoy these, have some conversations with your family about these. But the first tool for learning to love yourself well is to agree with God. Jesus is the one who said, that this is the commandment: love others as you love yourself. And I think a lot of times this gets oversimplified to, we need to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor. Like, we've got to love well. And we leave off the condition that God actually placed on this. This is the condition God placed on this command, was love others as you love yourself. And we need to not just assume, like, well, of course, I love myself, I'm a selfish human being. Like, no, that's not the same thing as loving yourself. Loving yourself actually gets rid of being selfish. So, and that might be a talk for another day. But anyway, limits in loving ourselves well will also limit our ability to love others well. It will always be striving instead of natural. Love others as you love yourself. Oh, how do you learn to love yourself? I'm just lost on my notes. I apologize. So here's what I like to say. God loves you, right? Like, but that means that you're lovable. And so just, he happens to be right, so agree with him. I sometimes say, like, I'm not big enough to tell him he's wrong. And so I will agree with him that I am lovable. I don't always feel lovable. Sometimes I feel like a big pile of mess, but then I will go to him and sit in the truth. God, this is how I'm feeling right now, but you say you love me. Why? What on earth do you love about me? What do you love about me? And And in that moment, it might be a word that comes to me. It might just be the atmosphere of his presence that just starts washing stuff off of me. It might be a vision of the future he sees for me. It might be, whatever it might be, but there's always some kind of encounter that then just helps me to exchange my truth, that's driving these feelings where I feel so unlovable, and I can surrender those things to him and receive from him his reality, because he's right. If he says I'm lovable, I'm lovable.
Yeah, it's so good. Oftentimes, what I beat myself up about is feeling like I haven't been a good enough mom, or I'm just not doing a good enough job. And sometimes I'll be like, God, what do you love about me? And oftentimes, what I hear him say is how well I love other people. And that brings just a certain amount of peace to me, because that's the thing that I feel like I'm not doing well, is loving other people well. And then he's like, no, I love the way that you love. Like, you're so good at loving. And then it just changes our whole atmosphere. Agreeing with God is meditating on his truth. And I'm going to let Nathaniel share these ones, but I'm going to share mine first. But, sometimes the process of meditation is to take something that's out here and actually make it become a part of us. It says the word becomes spirit and life. And so it takes on flesh. The more that we think about something, the more that it takes on our flesh takes it on, whether that's truth or a lie. And so
Right.
when we set ourselves to intentionally do something or think on something, that helps our mind to get it not just to the surface level, but to the deeper levels, the core level of who we are. And, for God so loved the world, it's like God loved you and he chose you. And it says in John, like, God chose you and he anointed you to go and bear fruit that will last. Like you are chosen. There's a verse in Colossians that I've been meditating on lately. Just the first part, it says, therefore, since you are chosen, holy, Holy, and dearly loved. And I've just been making this my meditation. I am chosen by God. God chose me. God dearly loves me. Repeat that over yourself several times a day. I am dearly loved by God in heaven, and I'm holy. When we get to thinking about ourselves, we often think of ourselves as failure, not enough, unworthy. And he says, no, actually, because of Christ, you are holy. And having that sense of holiness that releases us from the sin and the shame and the guilt and the not enough brings peace. There's a purity that comes with that when we actually believe ourselves to be holy. And then that frees us to be able to enter into love with other people. Like, now I'm not focused on self or feeling so bad about myself that I can't give love, but instead I come like overflowing with the love that the Lord put into me so that I can love well with others.
Yeah. And so one of the key verses that has been part of my process of learning to love myself is 1 John 3:20, that says, if our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts and he knows everything. I love this verse so much because it's like, first of all, this was the disciple Jesus loved who wrote this. Like, John is the one who wrote in the Gospel of John that he was the disciple Jesus loved. He was the guy who focused on the love of God. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Like, John majored in the love of God. And he's the guy saying, and when our hearts condemn us, like, if the apostle John, the one who literally laid his head on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper, if he still sometimes had his heart condemning him, then I don't feel so bad when it happens to me, and I don't end up in that death spiral that's like, I'll beat myself up for beating myself up, and it's like, okay, I'm in good company, and then I can move on to the next step, which is, if our heart condemns us, we know that God is greater than our heart. Okay, so this is what my heart's saying, but God is bigger than my heart. He's greater than my heart. His words have more authority than what my heart is saying. And so I need to be able to exchange what my heart is saying for what God is saying. And just in case there's like this, yeah, but this thing that I did, like, yeah, but God knows everything. And so it's like there is nothing hidden from the Lord. There's nothing hidden from God. He knows everything, and he still loves us, and he's greater than our heart. Like whatever we think might be our trump card to justify our emotions of beating ourselves up or feeling bad about ourselves or not loving ourselves well. It's like, no, God just, boom, I'm God and I know it and I love you anyway. Let's move on. Mm-hmm. And so I sit on those truths and I meditate on it. And I move on to 1 John 4, where there's a kind of a complicated sequence of verses, but I summarize those verses by saying, I live in love and loves in me. Love lives in me. And I learned this prayer technique called breathing prayer, where it's a meditative kind of prayer technique where you breathe out a prayer and you breathe in a prayer. And this is a great one for that. So it's almost like with every breath, I live in love and love lives in me. And I live in love and love lives in me. Because it, like, God is love and I happen to be his home. And so literally love lives in me. And anyway, I encourage you to go dig deep into 1 John 3, 1 John 4, and see these verses on love for yourself. But then just meditating on it. And sometimes this is what I'll do in the shower is I just take the entire time I'm in the shower. I live in love and love lives in me. I live in love and love lives in me. And it's the waves of the ocean washing my mindsets in love.
Yep. Pretty much every life coach out there will tell you another great tip for learning to love yourself and having more success is to celebrate your wins. Woo-hoo! I am surprised. I've been and taught this at a number of places, and I will do the activation and ask people to share 3 things they like about themselves. And so many times people can't even share 3 things that they like about themselves. They can't come up with something. So practice what you like about yourself, but celebrate your wins too. And this is a practice that takes a little bit of time to become habit, but once you begin seeing them, you'll be able to come they'll be able to come to your mind a lot faster. And you guys, you can do this while you're driving in the car, while you're doing the dishes, while you're taking a shower. Just at some point during the day, make it a habit that you begin to get into to look at and celebrate the wins of the day. Now, these don't have to be big wins. They can start out being really small wins. Sometimes it's just the fact that, hey, I got up and took a shower today. Especially for moms with little kids, like getting a shower is a win,
Totally is.
Sometimes when I would go to bed and the house would be just trashed when I had 5 little kids, I would be like, hey, here's a win. Nobody got hurt today and everybody got fed. These are big wins. Celebrate them and allow your heart to actually celebrate them. And then you'll begin to see bigger wins. When I have significant wins, I actually take and write those down on purpose so that in harder times, I can go back and go like, man, that was such a victory that day. That's right. I had a victory. And then we can meditate on those victories and it will cause us to have more victories as we go forward.
Right. And a couple of really powerful keys that we've gotten from a psychologist friend of ours is to, Amy said, do this at any point during the day, and that is good. But it can also be particularly powerful if you write it down, not say it, not think it, but write it down at the end of the day. And then your brain will subconsciously meditate on it, stir it on it, just simmer on that all night long. And that actually is more powerful because of the way that it engages your subconscious for a long period of time. Also, he said, so I'll get to that. I'll give the other tool really quick. Also, whatever you feel like that win deserves as in terms of like the level of celebration, like it's birthday party, it's not wedding, you know what I mean? Like there's different levels of celebration. So whatever you think it deserves, bump it up a couple of notches. If you think it deserves a 3, give it a 5, and just really, really celebrate that. Engage your voice in it, like, woohoo, yay, like actually do engage emotion in celebrating this win. And again, like Amy said, these could just be really small things, hey, I made dinner instead of going out, or it could be things that relate to progress you're making, and not like a rival, so like, for example, it could be that you kept your temper today, or in that moment, you kept your temper when normally in the past you would have lost your cool, you would have yelled, or you would have said hurtful things, or whatever it was, like, those are things of progress. That doesn't mean you've arrived at, my normal is to keep my temper, but today I did, and I'm going to celebrate that. And that celebration actually helps give you momentum to keep your temper again the next time. So, or related to that, because I think this is important to say as well, is, not just, hey, today I had this win, but my norm has still been losing my temper. But as that progress continues on, you're not going to be perfect yet. You still have the day where you lost your temper. Just using that as the example, you can celebrate, hey, but 3 times out of 4, I kept my temper, and I was kind, and I said loving things, even while drawing boundaries, and I did it in a healthy way. So today I didn't do my best. But this isn't my norm anymore. And that is massive reason to celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Another way to learn to love yourself well is to learn to receive compliments. That when somebody tells you, like your kid comes up to you and they're like, you're the best mommy in the whole world. You're the best daddy. You're the best dad I've ever had. Like I'm the only dad you've ever had, like our kids say this, you're the best mom I've ever had. I know, the only one, but we can let that roll off as something like that, like writing it off, versus to actually pause in that moment, tell yourself, wow, my kid does actually love me. My kid thinks I'm a good parent, and just be like, I am a good parent. Look at that. I'm a good parent. Your spouse compliments you. Your spouse is telling you, I love you, and then take the moment to not just let it roll off. And you guys watch when people compliment you, what comes up inside of you. This is so important that you recognize the walls or the defense or the bristling or the but, or turning the compliment around and not receiving it. Like, take the moment to receive the compliment and let it actually feed you and encourage your heart. That's another way to learn to love yourself well. I think, should we stop there? Because these are bigger ones.
Those are kind of bigger ones. The next couple of points, I'll just let you know in advance what they are, that it's inner healing and it's learning to set boundaries. And those are maybe a little bit more scary, but we're going to make them not scary. So there's so much life in all of these things. And I'll tell you what, just take what we've given you today. Again, like we've said several times, this is going to be like minds need to shift, and to change a mental habit, you're going to need like 30 days to really see significant change happen. And so this isn't necessarily quick, but the more you engage it, do that first step of setting love as your priority, the more you just really like, God, you are my helper in this. Holy Spirit, you lead me into all truth. Holy Spirit, you are my helper. It's you and me. I'm going to set myself to love my family well. And I'm not looking to arrive at perfection today. I'm just looking to do it better today than I did yesterday. And I'm going to celebrate my wins, and I'm going to celebrate my victories. And I'm going to believe when my kids are like, wow, Dad, you changed, you did that differently. And I'm learning and I'm growing, and I'm going to be proud of myself, and I'm going to celebrate that. And I'm not going to feel guilty about feeling good about myself, like I've got to punish myself into perfection as if that ever worked in our past, because it never did. But I'm just going to love myself well. And you watch. you watch, because it's going to absolutely transform your ability to love your family well. It's going to make it easy. It's going to make it the most natural thing for you to do.
Yes and amen. All right. On that note, we bless you guys on your journey. I thank you for joining us. Please mark your calendars to join us, because Facebook is not putting these things out on our wall anymore. And I know that's where most of you saw us. And
Right.
not only that, they're making it like a private event. So when I do try to share it, it's just blocking it out as if it doesn't exist. So anyway, put it on your calendar just to listen in, and we would love that. Feel free to like and share, and we will catch you guys next Friday with part 2 of Removing Hindrances to Love. God bless you.